Hi, everyone, and welcome to my talk, uh, Sling CMS, Building a Simple CMS on Apache Sling. So this talk, we're going to talk about building Apache Sling CMS, which is a module within the Apache Sling project, and some of the work that myself and others have done to build out, this reference content management system. Now, you notice I do work for Adobe, and you may ask yourself, well, wait, doesn't Adobe have a content management system? And yeah, AEM is a thing. Sling CMS is actually something I started on well before joining Adobe. And it's really an open source effort to create a reference of an application created on Apache Sling to do web content management. So Sling CMS, I started on it in 2017, and it was part of an effort to make Sling shiny, um, which included, revamping the website, updating some documentation, as well as introducing the Sling CMS reference application. It it is open source and is really made to be a very light version of a content management system. You can see the first version, had not very much on the front end in terms of JavaScript and UI. And really since 2018 or so, I've been working on revising the user experience, adding new features, and improving the look and feel and functionality of the app. One of the big introductions was using Bulma UI to kind of clean everything up, make it look a little bit more attractive. And then recently, this year actually, I converted Sling CMS over to the feature model. So away from the provisioning model to the Sling feature model, as well as doing actually even more UI enhancements around thumbnails and having cards for images and that sort of kind of fancy stuff. Partially just to make it look nicer, but then also the big underlying change to the feature model brings a lot more flexibility to how Sling CMS can be deployed. So what is Sling CMS? Simple and lightweight, right? So it doesn't require a lot to actually run it. It can run on a single core server with about 1 GB of memory pretty well for a small website. In the browser, it's very light. I tried to keep the scripting and that sort of thing light, and it does follow Sling practices to do server-side rendering. So it is built on the Apache Sling and the feature model. So all of the bundles inside of Sling CMS get built into features. It's composing those features together, and you can actually express your applications as Sling features and use that to build out your instance. And it's built on best practices. So everything inside of the CMS is itself a content with a content node with a resource type that renders it out. It uses the resource mapping so that you get nice pretty URLs for all of the CMS functions. It uses Sling context-aware configurations for configuring the entire application, and all that all that sort of fun stuff. And then it is free and open source. So you can go to GitHub and download it and run it yourself. I personally use it for my personal website, and it's fairly easy to run. So what is it good at? So Sling CMS is good at the single tenant multi-site setups. Um, okay, so Sling CMS is applicable for single tenant multi-site setup. So you can have multiple sites in the same instance, but it doesn't have built-in tenancy support. It's applicable for Docker deployments. Note, not fully containerized. So Kubernetes type applications. Um, it doesn't yet natively integrate with that 12-factor type application. It does include a lot of features around asset support, so metadata extraction, thumbnail generation, image compression, and I spent a fair bit of time here working on handling assets because that's something that's not included in the Sling framework and something that I think is pretty important for this web content management use case. It does have a drag and drop WYSIWYG authoring experience. Again, something I spent some time on because, it's when I looked at the different open source CMS systems out there, that's one of the things that really uh, isn't great about a lot of the existing ones in the market is that drag and drop experience. I think we all know and like. And then, not surprisingly, very good at content heavy sites. not so great at interaction heavy sites. So, if it's a use case for a single page application, using a single page application framework is going to work better. And then it does include a component and template framework. So, the ability to create a template and share it and have components that abide into it. So from an organizational perspective, and hopefully now you can actually see it, um, the top level, not surprisingly, is content. So sites and static content just being basically files and nodes that aren't ever expected to change. And then the sites being your actual contents, your pages, your files, your folders. A taxonomy, which allows you to do relationships between different pieces of content. There's a section for user-generated content, so there's actually built-in features to have forms to gather that user-generated content and then moderate it. And then there's a special browser for configurations, that's Sling context-aware configurations, where you can configure your file configurations, your templates, your components, all that sort of stuff can be configured through there. And then there are a number of tools built in that I've that I found very useful, like the bulk replace option. And then it also includes Composum as well to have content packages and the node browser that's built into that. So from a content type perspective, so the top level content type is a site or a site group, which is more or less a special kind of folder. There's more configuration associated with that, so that links out to Sling context-aware configuration, as well as you can configure some other configuration settings like the URL and that sort of thing, which get used for URL rewriting. Then underneath that you can have folders or pages or files. Folders can be put at any level, and so, like, for example, for my own blog, I create a folder per year and month, and then have pages for each post, and that way I can organize it without having to create a whole bunch of nested pages that really don't do anything. The pages, can either represent a document page like on a website. There is some limited support for just content-based pages that may be used for, like, let's say if you had a slider or something like that and you want to create fragments of content and reuse those. There is some limited support there for that as well. And then you do have files, and the files are more or less an asset that contains the metadata as well as renditions or thumbnails of the file, and you can configure what renditions be created per file. And then finally, there is the taxonomy, and so that's doing the relationships between the pages or assets, all the different content back and forth, and providing additional schema structure there. So let's go ahead and create some content. And hopefully you can still see my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And this is an instance running in Amazon Lightsail. So you have the recent content. You can also search for content. So you can see the content that I've got there. And underneath the site, you can see each site gets its own little card. I'll go ahead and open the sample site. And let's go ahead and take a look at these images. So the thumbnails here are generated on the fly and then saved underneath the asset as renditions. You can see here there's some metadata that I can do here, or that I can update here. There's some automatic metadata that's loaded out of the file. And let's go edit a page. And so the page, this is that WYSIWYG editor, so I can go in here, select this image, and it's going to suggest images or files at that path. Let's go ahead and change this over to Inigo and save. And it's going to update on the fly. So from a taxonomy perspective, you can just browse down through the tree and create a new taxonomy item. Fairly straightforward there. And every page also has metadata as well. So I can add adaptTo to that. And save that. And you can see here I can control the publication settings of the pages and the files from here. So yeah, so that's the basics of content authoring. You know, there's a lot more that you could get into, but from a 1,000-foot view, that'll do it. Now, another important feature is the context-aware configurations. So this is where you can define page templates, component policies, you know, all the stuff you see here, right? Configurations. You can actually configure the Sling rewriter from here, which is kind of a nice feature, and then define those file transformations. That's what creates the thumbnails out of the original asset, which, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean just images. It supports documents and PowerPoints and PDFs and all sort of fun stuff. I shouldn't say all, a very large subset of different file types, but not all. And then the file editor itself. So let's go ahead and create a template through the configuration screen. So if I were to go into here, go into my sample context-aware configuration, you see here it kind of has a structure. So the context and then the bucket. And then as I'm in the site configuration, I can see the templates. And add a new template. I'll click that view. Edit that. Oh, you know what I should have done? Let's delete that. Why don't we copy this one rather than creating a whole new one, because I don't feel like setting all that stuff up. So edit that, and we will change this to adaptTo. The JSON here is the actual structure that it's going to create. So it essentially does a Sling post with this. So we'll change the template path. And why don't we just go ahead and append a pipe and adaptTo to the title. So now that I've done that, I can go back into the sample website, create a new page, and there from the dropdown, see now I've got the adaptTo template option. So adaptTo, create that page. And as you can see here, it's got the pipe and the title there, just like I configured. So how do you get started? You can download a release from the GitHub, the GitHub project, or from the Sling site. There's links both ways here. So sling.apache.org or the GitHub site that I'm not going to read off because it's much longer. And then you can run java-jar and then the CMS jar to start it up. So I release it every a couple times a year. It's a little unpredictable. It's kind of when I have time when something major comes up. It does work from Java 8 to 11. I've not tested 17. I don't know why it wouldn't work since Sling supports 17, but I've not tested it yet. And if you want to be able to build it locally, which is just Maven clean install and it builds everything, then you do need to have Maven 3. So this is kind of that's an overview of Sling CMS. One of the other things I do want to talk about is how we actually do deployments of Sling CMS. So let's start by just opening up GitHub, and you can see I got my sample page here, and it's not yet updated for adaptTo. So let me go in here, and this is actually the GitHub app that's running that, or GitHub project that's running that that has the code for the site. I'm going to navigate to the body JSP. And let's go ahead and take care of that. Not yet. Now this has been updated. And since this takes a hot minute, I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint. So the traditional way of doing deployments, and the way I started doing deployments of Sling CMS when I first started using it, is to deploy it as a J2EE app, right? So a big fat Java app sitting on a server somewhere. And the big problem that I found is that every time I wanted to release a new version of Sling CMS, I need to extract all of my content, load up the new version, load all the content back in, and update everything, and hope that it worked, and that I didn't have some setting that I forgot to write down somewhere. Because nothing's in source control, all manual process, no fun to maintain. It does work, and I did have it to the point where it's doing deployments through GitHub Actions, but that effort of maintaining the infrastructure actually became a significant bottleneck for me, because it's not something I've got, I'm not paid to do that. It's not something I'm doing in my free time. So You can do a deployment like that where you just have a single instance. You can do a deployment where you have a rendering server and an author server, which gives you a little bit more ability to not have downtime. And it does support using content distribution for publishing content. But what I've actually gotten to is using a containerized composite. So there's two parts to that. First thing is it runs inside of Docker, making deployments a lot easier. And then the other thing is that it uses a composite repository. So the part of the repository is an immutable app mount, and then it has a content mount. And I've built on a number of different contributors to the Sling project that have already kind of shown how to do this. But kind of wrapped it up into something that is actually running in production and fairly templatized. So the way that it works is you start with your applications, you build out a feature model, build the images, and then you deploy that out to your container registry and through an orchestration system to the actual app. So there are three main steps there. The aggregation, and I think this is kind of important. So the idea being that I may have multiple apps that go into this feature model. So Sling CMS is actually just an app, along with my website, and then I got some other small things that I put together that all get aggregated into a single feature model. The next part is actually building the container images, and so those are created as Docker images, both for the CMS as well as for the web server that that handles as a reverse proxy, and then finally the orchestration of the deployment and the management of that infrastructure. In my case, that's Docker Composed, simply because I don't want to pay $75 a month to start off with to use Kubernetes, and I haven't had a chance to look into K3s or something like that that's a little bit more lightweight. But it's just, it's the simplest option to get started. So how does that feature aggregation work, just to start out? So I start off with my custom applications plus the environment configuration. So that's any secrets, any configurations that are specific to that particular environment, so I can support multiple environments, or I can put things in a secret file that's not going to get pushed into source control. Then I take the out-of-the-box features that come with Sling CMS. So there's a composite seed feature that starts up a unified mount, and then there's composite runtime that has that composite configuration already configured in it correctly to pick up your immutable and your mutable mount. And then there's a standalone renderer, author, a number of different features around the configuration of Sling content distribution that allow you to basically hook those together with the seeds and the runtime features to create the type of application you want. Since I'm just creating a standalone instance, I take the standalone feature and the composite seed feature plus the runtime and the standalone, and that builds out the features for running the Sling CMS instance. And then I'm also creating a custom feature archive, so that way I don't have to worry about exposing my project through Maven and all the credentials and that sort of thing. I just build a feature archive of it, so Sling, when it starts up, knows where to find the code for that. Then the final step is creating the two Docker images. So you got the seed image, which is used to build and start, and build startup, and then grab that, and then the runtime image, which is actually used during the runtime process. So the build process takes a number of steps. One of the ones that that's pretty important here to this overall process of combining multiple apps together is that it does have the ability to update dependency version. So I can trigger it and say, hey, go ahead and grab the version that was released on September 28th and add that in as the latest version of the site. So that's how it's able to manage that aggregation of multiple different dependencies, is that there's an update step. Then it builds out the feature files, as shown in the previous slide. It will then start up the process of building the Sling CMS image, which first copies the features to the CMS Docker image, starts the Sling CMS in seed mode, and then once it's fully started, it actually shuts it down and then copies the node store to the immutable mount. So it just essentially just a directory there. But waits for it to get a 200 response, and then shuts it down, copies that over, and then shuts the whole thing down and cleans it up so that we, keep the Docker image reasonable as possible. It's still a pretty big Docker image, but it's not, enormous. And then it sets all the runtime features. That's the end of the build. The build for the CMS. The web build is fairly straightforward. It just starts with a image that's got Apache 3D on it and deploys some configuration files. Then it tags and pushes those images into the container registry. It updates the tag in Docker Compose. So that's the integration with the orchestration. If you had Kubernetes here, probably just push in a new tag, and then it tags and pushes those changes all into the Maven repository. So at that point, the deployment process kicks in, and so there's the trigger, which it happens from GitHub Actions. It reaches out to the server and says, "Okay, I need you to go ahead and pull the Git project." Then when that Git project is done being pulled, that has all of the versions updated. It then pulls down the relevant images. It does update the Docker Compose state. So any containers that haven't changed will just remain. Any ones that have new versions will get rebuilt into that version, or restarted and re-uploaded with that version. And then it prunes out all the old images because, as you can imagine, if I'm doing lots of deployments this way, and these are not tiny images that builds up. So let's take a look at that end-to-end demo. So starting here with the sample app, I've got my action, and you can see this was just 8 minutes ago. So I updated the body JSP. That's going to run through some build processes, and then it does a trigger here. So it does a post against the infra app and with a specific action that then triggers this. So this is a separate project. This is the actual infrastructure. You can see it's kind of broken down into the compose, the features, the Docker images, and then some server scripts. So look at the actions there. That first action to update the version, so that's going to go ahead and update the version number for the app. It then builds the Sling feature model, which is pretty quick. And then you can see here it's going to build the CMS image, which takes a hot minute. It's 2 minutes and 17 seconds. That is actually starting up a Sling instance, waiting for a 200 response, copying some files off, and then shutting it back down. So that's the majority of the build time, or the largest chunk of the build time overall. And then it does the deployment, and the deployment is just done for SSH. So it's just hitting the server, pulling down the layers, downloading, extracting, etc., and then it runs a Docker Compose command to update the state of the instances to match the expected state. And the end result of all of that is you can see I got my not that updated. So now we switched over to probably taking a second here because it's getting a new instance updated for adaptTo 2021. So a lot of effort, quite a bit of effort to go through to update a few words, but you can kind of see how, I think you can see how this does make it a lot easier to maintain a CMS system like this, where, the Docker images and all of that just are always up to date, and you can do these deployments, on the fly fairly quickly. In total, let's see, so this took about a minute 18 to build there, and I think, what did this take? 6 minutes. So roughly 7.5 minutes to go to do a deployment end to end, which is about the same I'm seeing on my side as well. I have done some optimizations on my side to do like caching of Maven dependencies, that sort of thing. But 5 to 7 minutes to go live. So a few last thoughts. The next challenge really is dealing with cloud scale. So this is really just a traditional app inside of Docker. It's not a fully containerized app. If you're really generous, and I don't think it really is quite 9, but 9 out of 12 factors, because I am doing log aggregation, and everything's in source control, but it's not scalable. like, if I get a whole bunch of traffic on the website, it's just going to crash, and I can't horizontally scale. So embracing containerization does bring a lot of new problems. Specifically around being able to share configurations and auto scaling, and especially when having that a shared node store and shared indices as I'm bringing new instances online. Right now, if I need to bring a new one online, it does. There's one instance, one Docker container. It shuts that down and builds and brings a new one up. So there is some downtime. But I am still working on that. My next, I think next step in this is actually to move to K3s, have a document node store and an external blob store, so that theoretically I could at least run multiple pods. That's the presentation. That's Sling CMS, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'd be glad to answer any questions.